Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. Before we get going, my name is Penny. I'm the events manager for TASA, and I just wanted to acknowledge on behalf of TASA the traditional owners and custodians of this land. TASA recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and culture and pays respect to elders past, present and emerging. You may also like to tell us where you're joining us from in the chat below. Before I hand over to Tamara, I just want to let you all know that today's session will be recorded. If you don't want to be seen or heard on the recording, just please keep your camera and microphone off. Tamara, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Penny, and welcome everyone. My name is Tamara Borovica. I'm calling in from Buiwurrung and Buiwurrung lands of Eastern Kulin Nation in Melbourne, Narm, and I'm going to be chairing this session. In the interest of saving time, I'm going to be really quick and lead us directly into the three amazing presentations that we have here today. So the title of our session, as you know, is The Sociology of Emotions and Wellbeing in Music Worlds, Orchestras, Hip Hop, and Feminist Punk Rock. It does not get much better than this. We have three amazing presentations, each for 15 minutes, and we're going to save questions for the end, for the last 15 minutes. I'm going to be really sharp with time so that we have a good discussion at the end. And so our first presenter today is Dr. Penelope Bergen with the presentation titled Orchestral Work, Wellbeing and Substance Use, Exploring Psychosocial Risks in Australian Orchestras. Penelope is a lecturer and a researcher at the University of New South Wales Canberra School of Business. She's also a professional orchestral violinist and chamber musician with extensive performance experience in Australia and the Netherlands, now combining her passion for music with her academic work. Her research explores how personal, cultural, and professional identities shape workplace cultures and organizational dynamics, particularly in high-pressure and isolated, confined, and extreme work environments.
Okay. As you just heard, I'm a professional violinist. I have two colleagues who have done research in doping in sport, James Connor and Vanessa McDermott. So we've combined our interests. So we went looking for existing research on this issue, and it turns out, hang on, there isn't a lot. So look, there isn't much research on this topic. Where orchestral musicians are researched, it tends to focus on hearing loss, musculoskeletal occupational injury, and anxiety and depression, and specifically performance anxiety. So can you see that one? The work health and safety regulation slide?
We can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. All right, I'll just keep doing this. So in 2023, work health and safety regulations in Australia prescribed for the first time that employers have a duty of care to identify and manage hazards and risks to workers' psychological health and safety. So this introduces a new external mediator to working conditions in orchestras. So knowing all this, we thought we should start with an up-to-date scoping study to find out the basics. And just very quick background of Australian orchestras. There are 6 full-time symphony orchestras, 2 permanent opera and ballet orchestras, and a whole lot of casual orchestras that come together for musicals and all that sort of things. Smaller orchestras as well, like the Australian Chamber Orchestra, etc. So it's a very, very small permanent jobs. There's less than 500. So it's a very small field. So the first part of our research was an anonymous online survey. We contacted all the major orchestras and distributed the survey through them. So our aims initially were to get numbers, see how many people are using substances, what they're using, when they're using. And the second part of the research is interviews, which are ongoing. It's very difficult to find people who are actually willing to talk to us about this. But we've made a start, so let's kick on. So we were lucky to get enough people and in enough instrument groups that formed a good example of a full symphony orchestra, very closely aligned to the Adelaide and Queensland Symphony Orchestras. In that first survey, a whopping 54% said yes to having taken or continuing to use substances to manage music performance anxiety. This is a massive increase on a 2014 study, the only other study done in Australia, where they showed 31%. So over that time, 12 years now, it's gone up to 54%, which is huge. 87% also said they were aware of it as a common practice. So given that people are self-reporting, we're going to say the real number is between 54 and 87%, which is enormous. The most commonly used substance is beta blockers, 95% of respondents. 21% of musicians also who responded said they have a prescription for general anxiety, which tells us that the problem with beta blocker use is primarily workplace related. The most surprising thing in terms of use, when people are using, is that 61% of respondents are using drugs just to go to rehearsals, which I think is absolutely extraordinary. So kicking on, we've done some interviews. So that was from the online survey. We've done some interviews, and there are two core themes that are showing up. There's one overarching theme, which is pressure, two sub-themes, individual level pressures and systemic level pressures. So let's start. I'm not expecting you to read all these quotes on the page. All the participants talk about internal pressure, and it starts in childhood. They pressure themselves as children. These are personalities that self-select to engage or continue to engage with classical music because they like spending hours alone in a practice room, hyper-focusing on their one special subject, which you can probably see might be leading to this thing. So more than half of them have mentioned potential undiagnosed neurodivergence as a big issue, that a lot of classical musicians are probably neurodivergent, which can cause all sorts of emotional dysregulation, as adults, which just adds more internal pressure. One of those potential byproducts of that is perfectionism. So a lot of similarities in classical music compared to elite sports, ballet dancers, gymnasts. It can be a driving force, perfectionism, but it can also be very, very toxic. We have parental pressures, so parents who want to justify the expense of individual music lessons. So children have to win scholarships, go to the Eisteddfods, contribute to that expense, which adds more pressure. Another individual level pressure is the actual physiological responses to performing, which can be quite extreme. And so far in the interviews, they seem to get worse as children get older and start to move into the profession. There is also social pressure from peers to fit in and behave in ways that orchestras deem normal. As one participant, hang on, sorry, am I in the right spot? Yes. One participant said, "You win the job at the audition, but you keep the job at the pub." So this idea that for example, it's not just socializing, it's all this sort of drinking, heavily drinking, especially in the male-dominated sections of the orchestras, like brass, double bass, percussion. If you go off, if your leader of your section goes off and drinks 5 pints in the interval, you have to keep up, or you don't keep your job. So this sort of pressure, peer pressure to fit in, becomes very internalized. I've got to get rid of this thing. Now, the second core theme is, where are they? Here, systemic pressures. Can you see that? I'm just checking you can see the slide. Okay, good. So the education system, teachers have a big influence over their charges. You've got old school performers who don't acknowledge music performance anxiety even exists. And then you've got teachers who actually introduce their students to beta blocker use. The whole system of classical music is described by the comment on the left, which is describing where you're funneled into one avenue, and that is to win a job in an orchestra, and that's it. That's your entire education. That's what it's all geared towards. again, incredibly pressured. It's very narrow, musically, socially, and emotionally. Another theme is hiring practices and job market pressures. Classical musicians start performing professionally when they're very young. I was 14 when I started performing professionally in orchestras for operas, regional performances. You go through conservatorium, you start to audition for orchestras. I have known classical musicians who win permanent jobs in orchestras at the age of 16. Right, we're talking about a profession that hires children. And they're exposed to this culture. If we're talking about drug use, they're exposed to this culture of drug use. Another pressure is increasing performance demand pressures. Over the past 10 to 20 years, we've seen a massive increase in the time that people are actually performing, the amount of time that people are performing. So where once upon a time, just 20 years ago, you'd go to a few rehearsals and then do a concert and have a couple of days off. Now you've got rehearsals that are being live streamed. You have live audiences. They are all recorded. You have to show up in your concert gear. So you are doing full performances every day, including in rehearsals. So you're also being asked to provide your top 10 Spotify list and pictures and videos for social media accounts. So social media has drastically changed the actual profession. So there is no downtime from actual performing. There are gaps in training. Nobody prepares a classical musician for leading a section, for example. There is no middle management training, know how to manage people. If you're lucky in your education, you'll get a class on how to teach, if you're lucky, or how to do auditions, if you're lucky. You will not get a course on people management. That's another added pressure for those in those roles. Another pressure on musicians is conductors. They continue to exist, I should say, outside the normal parameters of workplace culture and policies. They carry so much weight. They can fire people at will. They can shout at you. They can abuse you. They can bail you out in front of the whole orchestra. They can take you off stage during a rehearsal and tell you never to come back. Their power is extraordinary and it remains extraordinary. Things are changing, but it's still bad. And that is allowed to continue in this day and age is also extraordinary, and frankly, it makes my blood boil. We also have medicine's literacy problem. This is a systemic problem. It is not an individual problem. Understanding that 44% of adult Australians have a general literacy rate of a 12 to 14-year-old. That's the level of reading and comprehension. So medicine's literacy in the general population is going to be even worse. So I just want to very briefly talk about beta blockers. Beta blockers regulate your heartbeat. Common side effects include changes in blood sugar, fatigue, dizziness, nausea, constipation, bradycardia, so a slow heart rate, hypotension, which is low blood pressure, heart failure, and death. So medicine's literacy and communication in healthcare in Australia is a systemic issue. Communication in healthcare in Australia is extremely poor across the board. There's the woman on one of these quotes who's has a bottle that says take 2 daily as required. So she took 2 within the space of 5 hours. She was drinking coffee, she was drinking caffeinated drinks. So she had uppers and downers and her body couldn't cope. She ended up going into shock, lying on the lounge room floor with a blanket over her for many, many hours. So
3 minutes left.
Okay. People are not good at understanding all this, how to do this. So there is no discussion in classical music about fairness or the values-based spirit of music. People do refer to it as cheating or performance enhancing, but there's no discussion about that like there is in sport. So we look at who bears responsibility. There are 3 areas where responsibility needs to be taken. Individuals can absolutely do something about trying to mitigate, work with their management to try to change things. Organisational risk. So organisations have to take responsibility and engage with the new legislation. And legislative policymakers can also actually be much more engaged in what's going on in classical music. So the global implications are that this is kind of like the canary in the coal mine for the global classical music industry. Beta blocker use is rife. Generally, it's safe, but oftentimes, if you don't know enough, it can cause terrible outcomes. Musicians still have no obvious or structured pathway to support them to manage music performance anxiety. So just very quickly, classical substance use in classical music is not just an individual issue. It is a systemic response to pressures and expectations that start in childhood. So it requires a systemic mediation. So the pressures on orchestral musicians increase dramatically over their life. Failure to address these issues puts musicians' long-term mental and physical health at great risk. And I think I can stop there. Have I done everything?
Perfect. You have like 30 seconds left.
Sorry, I blazed through.
Excellent timing, Penelope. Thank you so much. That was so interesting. I was thinking particularly in the light of like burgeoning research on the benefits of exposure to music and, art by prescription, and then the toll that professionals in the field experience.
Yeah, we talk about all that sort of stuff, how great music is. Oh, that's really lovely. Music therapy, yay, it's really helpful. Who's taking care of the musicians?
Yeah. Yeah, wonderful questions. Okay, so for anyone in the room, if you have questions for Penelope, write them down or pop them in the chat. We're going to move to the next presentation immediately. And our next presenter is Dr. Diane Roger with a presentation titled Companion to My Mental Health, Young People's Hip Hop Listening Practices and Wellbeing. Diane, would you want to start sharing? Excellent. Okay, so Diane is a senior lecturer in anthropology at Adelaide University and a hip hop fan with a long-term commitment to understanding hip hop culture in so-called Australia. She's currently researching how people remember, archive, and perform hip hop histories, work that informed her book, The Calling, from 2023, and she's co-editor of Representing Hip Hop Histories, Politics and Practices in Australia from 2024. Okay.
Thank you so much. Really thrilled to be here amongst these excellent papers. So thank you, everyone. And just to reiterate the acknowledgement that we heard at the start today, and just to indicate I'm coming to you today from Kaurna country, and this project was conducted on Kaurna country. So just to recognise them as the traditional owners of this country. So a bit of broader background about this project, which I'm going to minimise in the interest of time. So I'm speaking today, but this is a group project, so I really want to shout out the other members of the team. It's a very interdisciplinary project that has 2 quite distinct phases. The first phase was looking at machine learning sentiment analysis of hip hop song lyrics, and I'm not going to speak at all to that today, but if you have questions, feel free to ask at the end. Instead, what I'm going to focus on is the qualitative part of this project. So we were very interested in what are the key themes in hip hop lyrics, but also comparing a sentiment analysis of the text of song lyrics to actual songs themselves and to young people's experiences of listening to hip hop. So this is what I'm going to focus on. So it was a very open-ended qualitative interviews that we did with young people, thinking about their broader music consumption and how hip hop fits within this. We were also very interested, because we were doing the sentiment analysis of lyrics, to think about the relationship between lyrics and sound. So having that more holistic view about music beyond just the words of lyrics themselves. So I'll tell you a little bit about the interviews that we conducted. So we did, as I said, qualitative interviews. They were usually for about an hour, but depended on how much the person wanted to talk. We did 20 semi-structured interviews, primarily with hip hop fans in Adelaide, but we expanded out over time and had an online component which enabled us to reach more people. So some people we spoke to in person and some people we spoke to via Zoom. The people were aged from 17 up to 29, with the median being 23 years old. We had 11 people who identified as men in the study, 8 as women, and 1 person who was non-binary. The majority of people who agreed to participate in the study were white settler Australians who were born in Australia, and that did really shape the findings in specific ways. I'm not going to comment on it a lot in this presentation, but did just want to really flag that because I think it's important to acknowledge that and think critically about that. And we did have people from other cultural backgrounds as well, including Greek Cypriot, Jamaican, Iraqi, Kurdish, and we interviewed 2 people who were on exchange at my university with Anglo-Celtic and Anglo-Indian backgrounds. People had quite different levels of participation in hip-hop culture. So some people were actually making music themselves, so they were artists. Other people were solely listening to music. Some people, even though they were fans, were quite heavily involved in a local hip-hop community and scene, whereas other people were listening primarily to American hip-hop or hip-hop from around the world, the UK, for example, and not necessarily very embedded in any kind of sense of a hip-hop community or scene. In terms of what the young people were doing, 13 people were students, and this is including high school students right up to people studying their masters. 5 people were not studying and were working, and 2 people were currently out of work at the time of the study. So the study is approved by the Human Research Ethics Committee at my university, and throughout this presentation we're using pseudonyms, and some of the pseudonyms were chosen by young people themselves. So there's some quite fun ones that people chose to have attached to themselves. So what are some of the bigger themes across the study as a whole? We found that there's quite different kinds of listeners. So we had this interest in lyrics and music. We found there were some young people who put a lot of emphasis on lyrics, and lyrics were very important to them, whereas for others, the actual content of the hip hop music is less relevant and they're more interested in the music itself. But most people said, well, the 2 work together. So they saw music and lyrics as being really connected. They often commented on how listening to hip hop was a way that they learnt and had a lot of self-reflection through hip hop, both learning about themselves but also other people. So learning about different political issues and other people's experiences from around the world. They did talk about a social connection through both music itself, so not feeling alone when listening to music, even though you may be in a room by yourself, but also for some people, that sense of community through hip-hop culture. Because we had this interest in AI, we did ask people about what they thought about a sentiment analysis of hip-hop lyrics, and could you find the meaning of hip-hop by looking solely at the lyrics. And most people were quite suspicious of AI. They didn't think that you could kind of get at the heart and soul of a song just through attention to lyrics alone. And some were quite suspicious, building on that, of algorithms more broadly and the way that that was influencing people's music consumption. But today, I'm going to focus on individual listening practices and its relationship to well-being. And this was actually the most common type of listening that people talked about when they talked about well-being. So listening when you're by yourself, quite often as well with headphones on. So that was quite interesting when we asked them about well-being, that they tended to go to this kind of individual listening as opposed to being at a live event or sharing music with others, which they also were doing. One of the key findings is around hip hop as being like a form of emotional regulation. And this is a concept that comes from psychology. In this presentation, I'm using it quite colloquially, and it's not a term that young people themselves used. So I'm thinking about whether to keep this or not, but I'm using it because it's a term that's often used to look at the quite purposeful listening that people do, and listening to actually transform emotions, which is a really key finding of this work. So people are seeing listening to hip hop as being a way to change their emotions, to process emotions as a form of inspiration. Interestingly, though, one thing that came out very strongly in the interviews is this idea of a balance, that there could be negative implications of using music to facilitate emotions or dwell in emotions or think about emotions. So I'll be talking about that today. So people often, as we said, this emotional regulation, so they very frequently talked about listening to music to match their mood, and they often use this term of matching explicitly. So people talked about using music to sit with and to dwell in and to feel, sometimes to amplify emotions that they currently were feeling. They talked about particular songs or even artists that they were kind of their go-to artists that they went to when they were in a particular emotional state. So they connected different artists to different kinds of emotions and things that they wanted to get out of the music by listening to it. Some people are actually making their own playlists for certain moods. So they're curating them themselves, which was a very interesting finding of the study. I'm going to move to read out some quotes from young people. So Fiona said that she was a mood listener, is the term she used, who liked to sit in her emotions and just be with them through their music consumption. Similarly, Selena liked to match her music to her mood. Like when she's feeling angry, she's listening to angry music. She said, I have some anger inside of me. So it's like sometimes the offensive stuff is like, yeah, it's like a release of angry. They're angry at someone, I'm angry at someone. It makes sense. Trevor is another person who used this term of matching. And this is a quote from him. I'm having like just a shitty day. I'll put some stuff on that's just carefree in terms of like rough and stuff like that. I have that feeling and that mood, and then I match that with what I want to hear. Odell is another person who listened to hip hop when she was feeling upset and angry, but she also said when she's feeling like excited and energetic as well. So as seen in these different kind of interview excerpts, the emotions that people wanted to feel or to maintain through their music that they're listening to, it ranged really dramatically. And some people had go-to songs, as I said, that they listened to in particular moods and made their own playlists. And so this is an example of someone who's making their own playlist, Celeste. And she says, I've got my bad bitch playlist, I've got my sad bitch hour playlist. So it's 1 hour and then I'm allowed to cry for 1 hour and then I'm done. And then I need to get over it and move on. And this sense of the imposing a time limit on your listening was really common. So people spoke about this as a strategy to sit with your emotions for this set period of time and be dark and be depressed and be in that moment, but then to turn it off and move on. So another person who called themselves Lucky Strike, they said it's a way to tune in to your emotions, listening to music and that he listens to a lot of hip hop music that's not very happy. It is what he calls to be quite dark. And he says that can be quite powerful to sit within that feeling of darkness or sadness. But then he also said you have to be a bit careful about steering yourself too far into a sadness. So I'm going to come back to that, this sense of the balance a bit later. But first I wanted to look at listening to change mood, or as a kind of inspiration. So people are certainly selecting music quite purposefully to try and change their emotions, not just sit with or match existing emotions. And again, people have like whole playlists for like good music, happy music, music that's going to be uplifting for them. So here's an example on the slide of this, of Mike Love, like how can I be sad? I'm listening to this happy music. I cannot be sad. So people are seeing music as a source of energy and motivation. Particularly, they talked about music listening for exercise, for getting in the mood, for going out, for some kind of social occasion, for studying was a big theme around this. If you have to concentrate, then you can have the classic lo-fi beats to study with is an example that someone had. So it's really helping people to focus on tasks. So again, it has this really important temporal aspect to hip hop music listening. So hopefully you can start to see hip hop music as quite a powerful means of reflection and processing is a key theme of our interviews, whether that is trying to change your mood or trying to match your mood. People saw listening to hip hop as a way to navigate emotions, navigate life challenges. This was more a clearer theme for people who made hip hop themselves. So people who are actually making hip hop spoke about making beats and writing rhymes as a really critical part of this, but people who are listening to hip hop also did as well. So a way for people to reflect on things they're going through in their life. Specific examples were things like parents' divorce, romantic breakups, being bullied, health challenges, work stress. It's a companion to my mental health. That's where the title comes from. Sometimes specific lyrics are helping, but often just the vibe of the song and songs becoming bound up with memories and people, especially loved ones who had died. And grieving was a big finding from our work. So people, as I said, though, said we have to find a balance, though. They were worried that if they listened too long or to the same kind of songs for too long, that they're running away from issues in their life, that it's going to mean that they kind of remain in that negative point of view. Some people did say that there is some hip hop music that does have lyrical themes that they would be concerned about listening to for a long period of time or solely listening to, that sometimes it can be violent or misogynistic, or there's self-harm or drug use talked about, or that even just the sound of music itself could be quite negative. So there is this sense then of hip hop as somewhat healing, but at the same time, this theme of the balance came through quite strongly. So just to wrap up, young people are seeing this link between hip hop music and their well-being. They're seeing it as being quite cathartic, a distraction when they need it, a motivation when they need it, positive when they need it. But there is this sense it can become unhealthy. So people are mindful and thinking about that. I think the temporal aspect is very interesting and something I want to think more about and expand on. But certainly our study is showing young people, they're thinking very critically and very thoughtfully about what they're consuming, and also thinking about when to turn the music off in their lives. So thanks everyone, that's me.
Thank you so much, Diane. That was really interesting and fascinating, actually, to hear. I think I'm going to borrow some ideas and start naming my playlist, like Angry Bitch for when I have a difficult day at work. Thank you. Okay, so questions, please write them down or pop them into a chat. And we're going to move to our third and final presentation for today, titled Midlife Riot, Menopausal Punk as a Collective Feminist Effective Practice, which is presented by Dr. Belinda Johnson. Belinda is a social science researcher in the Social Equity Research Center at RMIT University. Her research curiosity is in intersections of diverse bodies, creative practices, and collective grassroots social change. Alongside her research on dance and Down syndrome for social change, lately she has been noticing and thinking about punk rock feminism. Belinda was part of the Betty Longshots, a 90s feminist band based in Melbourne, alongside fellow TASA member Professor Anita Harris. Very much looking forward to your presentation. Belinda, I'm feeling so blessed to share our workplace with you. I'm such a cool person.
Well, maybe wait till I finish, see if you still think that. Thank you so much, Tamara. And yeah, thanks to my co-presenters. It's been so interesting listening to your work. I'm based in Naarm, so I'm on Wurundjeri country. And before I start, I just wanted to make 3 quick points. So the first one is that this is a work in progress. So I don't feel like I've reached sort of my finalized thinking about the topic. And I guess as part of that, I want to say that I have been thinking and talking this through in collaboration. So with other feminist academics and also with musicians. And the third point I'd want to make is that this is a sociological exploration, of course, but I'm coming specifically from an emotion and affect perspective. So that's where I'm trying to go with what I'm doing. Okay, so and indeed that is my band back in the 90s. So there's 2 things that I'm seeing really emerging or surging in public domains. And that is the rise of 90s feminist punk rock or grunge or alt rock. And the second thing is the rise of menopause as public discourse. Now, both of these things are claiming space and attention in public domains. And I think as well, there's been this intertwining of the two. So that's why I've sort of referred in my title to the menopausal feminist punk rock. As Kathy Wilcox put it, there from Bikini Kill, there is nothing more punk than a menopausal woman. Now, I think on first glance, the interconnections seem pretty compelling. So menopause is a deeply embodied experience. It certainly can generate really intensified emotional experiences, including rage. And as can, I think, our social experience of women who are seeing, I guess, women in the menopausal, perimenopausal phase are seeing how older women are maybe dismissed and devalued across society, but also more broadly, seeing the attacks and pushbacks on women of all ages, on trans and non-binary folk, and on our rights across the world. So there's certainly plenty to experience rage about. So the women hitting sort of the perimenopausal phase are the Gen X women, I guess, who were the first gens of that 90s feminist punk rock. Yeah. So what am I noticing? This is sort of a bit of a mapping of what I've been seeing going on. So in terms of older women and punk or alt rock, I think the first thing I have to mention is the Riot Women series, which I think has it's very much in the public domain at the moment. So it's a BBC BritBox series, and I've got a quote there of how it's described on SBS. So, frazzled by demanding jobs, chaotic families, and endless spinning plates, 5 women's worlds smash together when they form a punk rock band to enter a local talent contest. And I just want to say it is a really entertaining series and I really enjoyed it. But there are a couple of things that I need to point out. One is that it's consistently framed as being five older women starting a punk band. But if you watch the series, you'll notice there are actually 8 women in the band. There's actually 3 women who are consistently referred to as backup singers, which is, in my experience, not a term any feminist punk rocker would ever use to refer to people who are part of the band. And those other 3 people are young women, 2 women of color, and one is a young, well, it seems to be coded a young trans woman. So as you can see in the image, I have attempted to draw them in to the publicity material. And, you know, I didn't use AI to do that. That was just all my own work. So alongside this interest in these sort of cultural products, and also we've got Vivienne Westwood, who's really being portrayed as an older woman with this had a lifelong punk philosophy. There's also been this really recent interest and output from the musicians from the 90s. So we have biographies just in the last year from Kathleen Hanna, from Bikini Kill, Melissa Aufdemer from Hole. We have a documentary about to come out on Courtney Love. And there's also lots of new releases. So Kim Gordon from Sonic Youth, who's in her 70s, has just released a new album. And Peaches, who's in her 60s, has just released an album as well. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of what's going on out there. The third thing that's happening in that space is that Gen X women and non-binary folk are doing everyday music practices. And I've got a snip there from an Instagram page on a post that's 3 reasons why you should start a punk band as a woman over 30. And I just want to point out that it was liked by over 70,000 people. And there was almost 1,000 comments, and so many of them were about, I took up drums when I was 50. My band and I are in our 70s. Like, there does seem to be this amazing amount of music making going on. So menopause as well is having a really big sort of breakthrough into the public domain. So there's lots of expanded public discourse and commercialization alongside that. And there is a group called the Menopunks in the US, and they explicitly describe themselves as a hormonal justice project. And they're actually a collaboration between a lot of women punk rockers, so feminist punk rockers, and medical menopause professionals. And they're really trying to raise awareness and debunk sort of bad science around HRT. So a couple of things I want to note at this point is firstly that menopause is not the only embodied reality. And I do think the coming together of these things is perhaps amplifying the menopausal aspect. And my concern with that is that it's maybe disconnecting what's happening, sort of narrowing down a group of women. When I think, you know, like the 3 missing characters from the Riot Women series, I actually think we have a lot more in common in the same room with younger feminist musicians as well. And the second thing to be wary of is around how much is the resurgence a media framing, how much have women, you know, who are now in their 50s and 60s and 70s actually been making music all along. So I think there are a couple of things that are flagging for me. In terms of research on older punk alt rock women, this is just like a real quick overview. So if it's UK focused, I'm finding often it'll be grounded around the original sort of 70s punk scene. And so the 90s feminist punk rock stuff will be sort of described as a later offshoot. Whereas I feel like in Australia, what's happening is much more grounded in the sort of 90s feminist music practices. But we have some, really great contributions. So Alison Wilmot is a cultural gerontologist who is proposing that because of the politics of feminist punk rock, that women punk rockers should fare better as they age because they've always consciously rejected capitalist, misogynist expressions of what a woman is and what a woman is valued doing. Abigail Gardner, who's a media studies person, talks about how timelines in music and punk rock should be about the genre of music, and being a musician should be a timeless thing. So it shouldn't matter what age you are playing a particular type of music. And Laura Way, and hi Laura, we've been in touch, is a sociologist in the UK whose work focuses around negotiating lived punk identities and the idea again of having punk rock as a philosophy of living for women that can take them through different sort of pathways. So my curiosity then is, does the Australian context, thinking through an emotion and affect approach, have something to add, have a different way of making sense of what's happening in this supposedly or nominally menopausal punk thing that's happening? So, and this is my band nowadays, so you can do a before and after. Look at the slides. So what I've been thinking is that menopausal or older women's feminist punk rock is a political and an emotion-led movement of collective being, but it is also a deeply embodied experience. So I think it's an experience that brings all of these things together. I think the collectivity of this movement is really crucial and central to the way we've always practiced our music. And I think it takes shape more in the collective do-it-yourself music making and activities and experiences. So Penelope, it really struck me that it's a real contrast with your world, that I think in feminist punk rock, amateurism is always something that was really embraced, and that being part of something was the crucial thing rather than needing to perform in any sense of an elite way. So then I've been thinking through emotion and affect, and I've got sort of two avenues I was thinking through. So the first one was a question of menopausal punk rock as affective practice. So that's using maybe the ideas of Weatherall and others, where affective practice draws attention to the entanglement of embodied states with meaning making. So the role, 3 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So the idea, and I think with affective practice, it means that we can think of this older women's feminist punk rock as focusing on the activity of creatively producing as sort of social affective practice. And I think it can really foreground the political discourses and the contest between them in our everyday actions. But I have to say, I'm really tempted and intrigued by the idea of thinking about a feminist punk rock sensorium. And I think thinking through the idea of a sensorium, it really foregrounds the politics of aesthetics. And for me, it can capture a more complicated flow of emotions. So there's a centering, I think, in talking about menopausal punk rock. It seems to really amplify the idea of rage. But in my experience of being part of these worlds, they very much also become practices of collective care. And there's all sorts of other emotions that get brought into it around desire, humor, sarcasm. And I feel like the sensorium can maybe capture the free flow between those emotional dimensions. And I feel like maybe the sensorium can also, well, capture the loudness of it, which of course is always associated with a punk rock environment. The more than human aspects, such as the instruments and venues. And I think it is a response. Marceau described that Simone de Beauvoir in The Second Sex described patriarchy as a male sensorium. So I feel like talking about a feminist punk rock sensorium is a really good retaliation to that sort of the expanse of the patriarchal world, rather than just the small political issues that raise up. And where this takes me to as an endpoint at this point, so this is my child, and this is my child who just saw my bass guitar, picked it up and pulled this expression. And I did think, from Woody Guthrie, we have the guitar statement, "This machine kills fascists." And I feel like my child picked up the bass and just knew that this was a machine that can kill ableist sexists. And it got me thinking about whether we have this punk rock feminist practice that those of us who were around in the 90s can have in our repertoire or our toolkit to return to express our rage and collect in a political, affective, social way. But perhaps there's something of offer in this practice that we have for other groups experiencing gendered oppression. So I think what the practice offers is collectivity as radical care, loudness as a technology of presence and visibility, and actually as a technology of soothing and collective, maybe regulation, valuing amateurism as an anti-capitalist position, storying everyday lived experience. So back in the 90s, Bikini Kill was saying things like, "I want to be her best friend," yeah. And nowadays, I went to see the Discomforts the other night, and one of their songs is, who are women non-binary folk in their 50s, and it's like, "All the toys are out of the pram." So it has that way of really engaging with those everyday moments. And so I feel like perhaps the creative expression of political motions through music can bypass the compulsory rational framings of capitalist production. So perhaps through using the sensorium of feminist practice, we can open up legitimacy and access of other ways of being human together. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, B. Okay. Well, this was such a yummy lunch break, I believe, for everyone. And I'm sure that the group has questions for the presenters. B, can you stop sharing your screen if you don't mind, so we can all...
I can't quite see the button to do that. So if someone else could. Thank you.
Okay, well, we have only a few minutes left, so I'm going to kick us off with one question and then see if there is something coming from the group. But yeah, listening to the three presentations about music and very different doings of music and being exposed to music or operating in a professional capacity made me think about music as a technology in more like a sociological sense for working with emotion and the limits of music as a technology. Do we rely on music too much? Are we overpromising now in terms of what music as a technology can achieve? And it's a question directed to all our panelists. So whoever feels like you would like to start.
I can start if no one's going to jump in. This is something talked about a lot in hip hop studies, because this is quite common for people to say hip hop is like therapy. It's like my therapy. It has this therapeutic aspect to it. But there's a lot of great scholarship coming out of people who are saying it's like therapy, but it's not therapy. And maybe there are some dangers in terms of, as you said, overstating what music can do, and when people might really need to talk to a professional and have other support systems around them. In other work that I've done, and other hip hop scholars as well have said on the flip side of that, people are using hip hop in such organic ways that fit within their lives. So there's maybe also some dangers around the institutionalization of hip hop or the medicalization of hip hop. So particularly in the hip hop therapy space, people have been raising that as a concern.
Thank you, Diane. Yeah, really interesting. It's as soon as we try to regulate some of these more creative grassroots expressions of human creativity, the problems start, right?
Yeah, I can add something to just a completely different angle that people expect access to classical music. They expect it. It's expected everywhere. You're expected to do it for free. People don't expect other forms of music, for example, just an everyday thing, performing at weddings, right? I did hundreds of them when I was studying. You turn up to a wedding and in a string quartet, knowing that the family was rich enough, they had a whole band that they had hired for the later part of the evening, but they would expect the classical musicians to play as long as they wanted them to play without paying you any extra, but they'd pay thousands of dollars for the band. And not just that, but movies and online, like classical music has to be used in so many different ways. But that expectations, like no one's taking care of the musicians. Where's that happening?
Yeah, that is so interesting. It's almost like we're taking it some kind of cultural inheritance that everyone has the right to. Everyone is in some way entitled even.
Yeah. And then you get that a lot of classical musicians just spend so much time and energy learning how to perform to an extremely high level that you then also expect that you're going to have a career and you're going to have a paid job. It's like, well, I don't think classical music should be a profession. I think it's wrong that it has become so professionalized. That's another story.
Yeah, really
Very.
interesting. Yeah, thank you, Penelope.
I've got a one-liner that sort of connects actually with what Penelope just said. I think music can be a technology to politically bypass the logics of capitalism and patriarchy. So it can be an alternate way that we can sort of feel human and feel part of like a connected communities.
I would sign up for that. Do we have any questions from the room? We have a few comments. Kat said music shouldn't be a profession. Ben thinks it should be a profession. Controversial, right? But of course, people need to pay their bills, and we need to be mindful of that too. I know we are 2 minutes past time, but I think we can just give room for one more question before we move on with our days. Okay, if there is nothing from the room, I am also curious. Oh no, we do have a question. Go ahead, Kat.
Yeah, I have a question for Diane. Great research, really like it. I was thinking it sort of had some echoes in it of stuff like Tia Dinora's work on like music and everyday life and, people using music for regulating their emotions, that sort of stuff. I was wondering if, there was anything that came out of it that seemed specific to hip hop. Like, were there things people were doing with hip hop that they might not have been doing with other types of music or particular songs, or yeah, was there anything genre specific that came out?
Great question, thank you. So people did talk about the amount of lyrics that a hip hop song can have, not always, but usually. So people were saying hip hop, people can tell stories in different ways and share their experience often quite directly in ways that does happen in other music, but these are hip hop fans, so that is what they were centering. For people less interested in lyrics, people did talk specifically about the beats used in hip hop music and the way that those beats connected to the effective sense of well-being. And particularly, I didn't have time to talk about it here, but many people spoke about their neurodivergence, kind of similar to Penelope's paper. And people with ADHD spoke about literally tapping out beats and that physical kind of acoustic connection to music as being quite important. And they did link that to particular kinds of beats used in hip hop music. But you're right to ask this question, what's unique to hip hop music? And people were certainly, even though we said be a hip hop fan to be in the study, people were drawing from broader music consumption that wasn't always solely hip hop.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Diane. I think we are at the end of our time together. I don't know if Penny wanted to say anything to close us, but I would love to thank our presenters for wonderful and interesting and stimulating presentations today, and for everyone in the room for listening.